Hey guys, it's Pastor with No Answers. Hope your summer is off to a great start. First of all, I want to process out loud something I've been thinking about when it comes to how people interact with Scripture. The longer I've been a Christian and the more familiar with the Bible I become, I'm convinced more and more that when people say, the Bible says such and such, at best, they're usually expressing that which they are convinced to be absolute truths that are irrefutable. I personally believe these sorts of truths are to be found in the Bible, but I think way more often than we like to admit when we say the Bible says. If we're honest, what we really mean is, I think this is what this means. I've thought about this a lot, but came to the surface the other day. Just so happened to be talking to a Gen Zer. They said something about how Jesus is perfectly loving, but a truth teller about sin. The truth teller characteristic, at least this particular version, many believe in. I do not, but that's for another day. The truth teller claim this person made, like many others do, point to Jesus's words to the harlot. I forgive you, now go and sin no more. They say, see, he's saying, I forgive you, but knock it off. And I don't believe this is what Jesus is admonishing, but rather there's an invitation to enter a new way of doing things. But the point I want to make here is the use of this verse to make these claims. Has anyone ever stopped to think that if we're going to take this as at face value, when Jesus says, then go, sin no more, we'd also need to go ahead and assume that Jesus is telling this person to do something that he's also said we'd never be able to get to a place in which we are sinning no more. So the very instructions one is upholding to make a point about Jesus saying, knock off this sin stuff, it all crumbles when you cover all the bases of face value. So if this is Jesus' way of saying, but I don't excuse your bad behavior, he's also turning into a religious deity who just express expectations that we cannot fulfill. Wow. Let's toast to an intimate, trusting relationship between the Creator and creation. All right, here's another one. This is in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25. This is a passage a lot of people point to as clear proof for the traditional view of hell in which people are tortured forever. The sheep and goats, the goats go to eternal punishment, the sheep to eternal life. Most of you are familiar. It's also the, Lord, when did we do these things? And when did we not do these things? And when you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me passage. Well, if you're going to use this as your foundation for scriptural support for hell, you also need to pause and question the very foundation of your belief of what salvation requires. I'd imagine there's many who would claim that the gospel says salvation is free, the price has been paid, and yet this whole narrative of this parable is people serving enough to get eternal life, and those who didn't serve others well paying the price with eternal death. This is a works-based salvation. And that's a scary proposition because I do not feed, visit, or minister to people enough. And to think of a lifestyle of trying to do more, never knowing whether I'm doing enough to keep God from saying, depart from me, I never knew you. What a horrible way to live. So my aim here isn't to downplay Scripture, but I do want to encourage us all to be a bit more honest with what we mean when we say the Bible clearly says. You're saying you emphatically believe this is what it's saying. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you'll run into all sorts of problems when you always assume you're reading it correctly in the event a fellow Christian says the Bible clearly says in a way that contradicts your clear interpretation. So your counterpoint, the person who sees the Bible saying something differently, is an idiot. I mean, it's clear to you, so they must be dumb if they can't see it. We're all doing the best we can, but there's just so much we don't know and so much more for us to learn. And to get back to the go and sin no more line, this is how I hear it. The times I've told my kids at night with a smile on my face, come on, man, you have nothing to be scared of. There's no monsters. You can go back to sleep knowing they won't be able to turn those fears off at the snap of a finger. And I won't be mad if they don't. I just want them to know that they can. There really is nothing to be afraid of. Well, I feel this is what Jesus is saying about sinning no more. He knows she won't be able to just turn it off at the snap of a finger, and he won't be mad that she can't. He just wants her to know that path is always there to get on, and he'd love for her to be on it as much as possible because he loves her. It's an invitation. All right, so two co-hosts of the show, Matt Oxley and Hayne Griffin, take the reins in this interview. I love the lesson they share right at the beginning, all too common of humanity. We're going to pop right into the conversation they're having about how both of them had preconceived notions and negative suspicions about the person that they interviewed. All of this based on no relationship with this person at all. And they are delightfully surprised about how wrong they were once they got to talking to this guy. A reminder to all of us, stop sizing people up, take a deep breath, and try to believe in the good in people. I bet you're going to love it. All right, Hayne, Oxley, take it away.
Hey, Matt. How are you?
Blessed and highly favored.
Blessed and highly favored. Well, we just had a really cool experience. So before we got in this interview, we were suspicious.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. Unpack that a little bit.
I didn't know the guy, the name or anything. And so I had to look him up and see his social media presence. Yeah. And it just felt very corporate.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know. It didn't feel like a real person was behind it. So I was like, what is this? And I read some of his stuff, and I didn't really change how I felt a whole lot. But when I met him, I really liked him.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah. Maybe a couple of weeks before this interview had to be rescheduled. We had planned it for earlier, and we had some technical difficulties that caused us to push it back. And Matt and I were texting back and forth about just some of the content that we were reading, and I
wasn't very
suspicious
grateful
of
either.
It. I don't know if I was either. Yeah,
no, we were both pretty harsh. But I was harsher, probably. But yeah, surely
once we connected with them, we put a face to a name. Just an incredibly warm, kind personality, and it became really clear, really quick that this is a guy that deeply cares. He's deeply compassionate, and we just got into a really cool conversation about kind of the state of being, everything from social media to just the incredible amount of anger that I think everyone's feeling all around about all of these topics. So, yeah, we walked into it suspicious and walked out of it really moved. At least speaking for myself, I walked away super moved.
100% agree.
Yeah,
I'm glad that delay happened because it gave me time to chill. Sometimes I'm just an ass. I've figured out. I'm working on myself all the time. But
I know for myself too, coming from such a conservative background that I grew up in, to make such quick judgments, it's kind of almost programmed in me to do that.
Yeah, I think I tend to, if I have an initial gut reaction, heart reaction, whatever, chest, feel something, I consider myself a way too emotional person. And it's why I avoid worship music and avoid really attending church a whole lot, because I don't want to be moved by my emotions so much, but I just am. It's just who I am. So I have to stop myself a lot and reevaluate once I've gotten over that emotional moment.
Yeah. Do you feel like also that emotional, because I know for me, it can be a negative emotion that drives me really quick. Do you find yourself falling into positive emotions a little bit too quick, that you would wear rose-colored glasses?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes. Some people think I tend toward the negative, but I actually have a lot of hope. Very hopeful about the future. I just think that there's a pretty bleak period between now and then that sucks.
Yeah.
But, I really think it's all going to be okay in the end.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if I'm not here, you're not here. Like, it's still going to be fun. Right.
Yeah.
I think the only difference between myself and John is that I think he has a lot more hope in the system as it is. And I have none in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I can't decry someone that. There are people that need to be doing that work. So.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I'm in the same camp with you. I feel like that the system we're currently operating in is, both sides are kind of doomed to fail at some point. It's been a slow death. Yeah. I just can't imagine this being sustainable in the long haul, but John brought so much hope. And just like you said, I'm in the same place. I'm very hopeful for the long haul, whether that means that America exists or doesn't.
Not that we're plotting. No plotting.
Nobody get on Reddit and start looking for codes in this little conversation. There's nothing's coded here. This is just straight up.
Are you the real Q?
Maybe Joey's the real Q.
Holy shit.
I demanded, pleaded, called God on promises and was like, you have to show up or I am done. And he did.
That's something to really think about. What does it mean that the God of the universe loves me?
Are we saying that our God is bigger than their God or what?
Man, you got my mind going crazy right now.
I just think that is evangelical bullshit.
And I don't fit in their box anymore. So feeling rejected from the church makes me feel far away from God.
If I'm living out the love of God, love of the divine, then in some ways we're unoffendable.
It's wrong to marginalize anybody for any reason.
Sometimes we can just have some things about our perspective that's off until we encounter someone who can challenge our thoughts, have conversations with us, and we just continue to grow and evolve.
I'm with you there. Yeah, I like that.
That sounded like womp, 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 womp to Rob.
I'm a hardcore gospel lover. I do love the gospel. I just think we get it wrong.
Girl, I was so highly medicated, I don't even know if you got it. Oh, God, my people.
All right, guys, this is Matt with the Pastor with No Answers podcast with Hayne.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here. Prepared. What are you talking about? With Hayne Griffin and a special guest named John Pavlovitz. Did I say that correctly?
Pavlovitz. Yeah,
Pavlovitz.
Great.
Pavlovitz.
I've been stressing over that. I'm very Southern, and we just don't have a lot of names like that.
And it's, I say my mom gets it wrong sometimes, so it's okay.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So the most stressful part of the podcast is now done. We got your name right.
We're in the clear. It's all good from here.
Well, John, it's good to have you here. Go ahead, Hayne. You're ready.
Oh, no. Just kind of breaking the ice here. So you're in North Carolina?
I am. I'm in Raleigh.
Okay, gotcha. I live in Asheville, so I'm just on the other side of the state.
Sure. I was just over in Boone yesterday, so I was on my way there.
Oh, nice. Oh, nice. What are you doing in Boone?
I have a son who's finishing up first year at App State.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
I'm a professional. I wear a lot of different hats, but I work for the Asheville Fire Department. And one of my firefighters, I'm a captain. His daughter just finished his first year at App State and had an amazing first year. Was his good?
Yeah, it was. It was eventful as all first years are, but ended really well. So it's been great.
Yeah. I don't know if I've met I'm sure it exists, but a single student that's attended there, graduated there, that just didn't have an amazing experience. So
yeah, it is. Yeah. Great place.
Yeah, it's beautiful up there as well. Cool. So are you from Raleigh originally?
No, I grew up in central New York and then went to Philadelphia for college, spent about 20 years there, met my wife there, and I've only been in North Carolina, I guess, only for about 20 years now in Charlotte, and here in Raleigh, it goes by quickly for sure.
Gotcha. And when you were in Charlotte, were you in ministry at that time? Kind of give us a little brief history of your ministry background.
Yeah, I grew up, in the Catholic Church. So I always tell people I was raised on gluten and guilt in a Roman Catholic, setting. And I had no aspirations to be a pastor. I was an artist and wanted to be an artist and went to school in Philadelphia for graphic design, illustration. And I ended up taking a job as an art director, was in my field doing my thing, and started volunteering for a local church there in Pennsylvania. and life just changed for me. I was sort of drafted into ministry slowly but surely. And so I had been in ministry for about 10 years when I first moved to North Carolina to start working at a fairly large mega church there. And
I'm assuming it's not Catholic.
It is not. It is not. I ended up, the church where we found in Pennsylvania was a small Methodist church. Probably, I think it was the second oldest in Pennsylvania, really small community, probably 100 people. But my wife and I really experienced the kind of community that we thought we would have growing up. And I had sort of drifted from my faith up until that point. And that sort of pulled me back into my faith story. And so it was just this long and almost imperceptible journey of going from drifting from my faith tradition, being pulled back into it, and then as a minister, feeling the conflicts that come with that, which we can talk about as much as you'd like.
Oh, sure. Well, I would like for you to touch on that just a little bit, because there's a lot of folks that are listening to the podcast that are either in ministry, they're deconstructing kind of even out of their faith. Mm-hmm. Some are completely out. Some are still very, very conservative in their faith. And I'd love for you just to kind of share your story. I think that really connects with a lot of folks.
Yeah. I think for me, since I didn't have the ambition to be a pastor growing up, when I entered into that sphere, I felt I had imposter syndrome, first of all, because I thought, well, I don't know how a pastor is supposed to talk. I don't know, how this even works. So it was always this learning curve. But because of that, I think I entered ministry with very different eyes than many pastors or people who wanted to be pastors early on. And I was always hypercritical. I was always questioning. And I think at times I realized, well, that curiosity was actually a liability, because as I leaned into questions that I had or disconnects I was seeing with the way we were doing things with the church, started to realize that is not always seen as a admirable character trait in certain systems. And so it began this journey of trying to figure out, how authentic can I be as a human being and still be the pastor that I'm expected to be? And so that really brought me more and more into this space where I started to speak more explicitly on matters of sexuality and race and gender. And so that's been my journey for 2 decades now, a little over 2 decades.
How did that go?
Yeah, I was about to ask.
Well, I tell people, it worked fairly well for a while because I had an equity of trust built up. I had relational capital. I was in the church in Charlotte for almost 10 years. And so I was able to nudge the community, but I was fully aware that there were certain places I couldn't go. And I had to, being a writer, we learn to wordsmith though carefully so that we can say what we want to say without saying too much. And it went well, even though there were tensions. But I started at a new church in Raleigh, and in 5 months into that time, I heard God calling me to leave that church, and it came in the form of my pastor's voice saying, "You're fired." And so it went as well as I expected. But
I'm assuming your pastor wasn't God.
That's correct. Yes, correct. And yeah, it wasn't in my quiet time. It was at a Thursday afternoon at a Starbucks. And I realized that, what I was treasuring as the best parts about being a minister were not really welcome there, because it was the kind of system that we run into a lot, where control is a huge part of it, and steering the narrative. And really, in a lot of those environments, as you know, doubt is seen as a moral flaw, and certainty is worshipped. And so when you begin to ask questions, there are certain environments where that's just not possible. And so that's what I ran into. But it turned out to be that sort of beautiful juncture for me, where I realized I have no expectations now on me. I don't have to represent anyone else's faith convictions but my own. And that's what I began to do, just speak and write from that place without all the baggage or the weight of the collective expectations of a congregation. And that changed everything for me.
Absolutely. So that Starbucks meeting, did you walk away feeling free? Did you walk away angry, worried?
Yes. I mean, I think going into it, I knew in this new environment and the kind of pastor that I was going to be, and that was be someone who spoke with clarity and specificity, that I was probably going to be either an authentic pastor or an unemployed pastor. And so I saw it coming, and I had some really, great people around me who said, this is probably not going to be a good fit for you long term because you have outgrown the system where this community is. And so it wasn't a surprise, maybe the speed at which it devolved, because for me, I was still doing work that I loved, that I was working with students and hundreds of students and really feeling like we're doing some great work. So on that, I grieved that, but I wasn't surprised. But I walked out in the Starbucks and thought, okay, but now what? Now that is a reality, do I want to try and work at another church? Do I want to start a church, or do I want to leave altogether? And that took some time to grieve that. And I remember waking up that first Sunday morning thinking, I was like in tears thinking, this is the first time in 17 years I don't have a local community to go to, a group of people to pastor. And then suddenly I had this voice in my head that sounded like my own that said, but wait a minute, the great news is you don't have to go anywhere, and you can spend Sunday whatever way you want, and you don't have to believe what you can believe what you believe and not believe what you don't believe. You can ask anything and say everything. And that turned out to be just the pivot point for me. So as disheartening as it was a new beginning.
And that was how long ago? That was
about a decade ago now.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Had you written anything? I'm sure you'd been writing, but did you have anything published at that time? Was there a springboard for you, or did you just kind of start from scratch right then?
Well, I had this blog that I had been writing, and that started back in Charlotte. And at the time, it was just written as sort of an insider blog for parents of teenagers, for other youth workers and other pastors. And slowly I began reaching an audience outside of that. And at the point after I was fired, what I found was there was a new freedom to my writing. And because I could speak more explicitly, I could say exactly what I wanted to say. And I wrote a piece called If I Have Gay Children, a way to try to humanize the issue of sexuality for conservative Christians. And it went viral, and I, found this nationwide audience, and then was just fortunate enough that I was able to build on that and keep going. And then shortly after was offered the opportunity to write my first book. But the writing aspect, like much of this, was completely unexpected. But for me, it was a lesson in, I always joke, the next day after I published that piece, I was on CNN and I'm being interviewed and it says on the banner, John Pavlovitz, pastor. And I say, it could have said unemployed and currently despondent,
Right.
And you see the whole, because I had no marketing campaign. I had no people behind me. It was just a few hundred words that mattered to me. I put those words out, and those words did the work. And so, and I saw that, and I saw the sort of ridiculous nature of social media and platform, because a day earlier I was in just a tremendously low place. And now suddenly people were seeing me as some sort of authority on issues. And so I've seen the humility. Tried to hold on to the humility of that and realize I'm very fortunate to have this platform. And also some of it is artificial, as all kind of public forums are.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I've been following you for like a couple of weeks now since I heard about the interview, and I'm post-Christian. I left Christianity 15, 16 years ago. So I'm not familiar with your work. But you have a very polished Facebook and Twitter, persona, I guess. And I was, whenever you first came on, I was like, oh, he's a real guy. He's actually a real person. Okay, good. Because it's very, I don't know how to describe it. Yeah. It's, on Facebook, it doesn't feel as realistic, as personal, but getting to know you, I'm enjoying it quite a lot.
Thank you, Matt.
It's interesting to hear you mention how social media feels, and how it kind of sometimes doesn't feel real. And I kind of feel that with a lot of things.
For sure. And I've had, I remember having a woman come up to me at a retreat I was giving, and she said, I love your writing. She said, I've read everything you've ever written. And I said, well, now you know 100% of what I choose to share with you.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that's the nature of social media, of the internet. We're all seeing this partial images of people. Mm-hmm. And so that is a challenge. And realizing, too, whatever perceptions people have of you, you have to figure out how to make sure they're seeing the most authentic version of you. And you can even become beholden, in my case, where I was beholden to a conservative, Christian environment or a mainline Christian, community, being beholden to them. You can also be beholden to a progressive following who rejects that system. And it's how do you stay authentic even in that? And so that's what I get up every day trying to make sure that I'm doing that.
That sounds very tough, actually.
Yeah, it sounds like a huge challenge. One of the big reasons that you're here today and we're interviewing you is we're plugging your book, Worth Fighting For, Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending. So kind of jumping off that platform, we're talking about social media. If cruelty is trending, which it obviously is in social media, how do you navigate that? I've been reading portions of your book, and you're so humble and honest to say that you've gotten in the food fights at times, on the social media pages. You own that so beautifully. How do you personally, because I think that the book is really needed right now in a time where it is a just nasty food fight. It's a roller coaster that people are jumping on. Yeah. And when the roller coaster rides over, everybody's just covered in vomit. Yeah. So that's right. How are you navigating that well, John?
Hayne, it's a daily, almost hourly endeavor, really, because I think the question I have to always ask, and I encourage other people to ask, is what is my motive here in the middle of a conversation? Am I trying to show someone something that I think they need to see? Am I trying to help them develop a healthier outlook on their spirituality, their politics, or am I trying to humiliate them and put them on blast? And it's hard to know when you kind of cross that line. And so really it's about, a lot of self-awareness, having good people around you to process the things that you're feeling, because ultimately we're all dealing with a level of elevated urgency that we haven't had to sustain, that most people shouldn't have to sustain. And we've done that for the past 8 years. There's just continuous emergency, and that's by design. And because of that, we're always in this state of mix adrenaline and outrage mixing together. And since these are things we care so deeply about, they're fraught with, emotional overload. And so it's always trying to figure out, hey, am I at my best right now? And if I'm not, how can I course correct?
Sure. Is it tempting with the emotional overload, like you said, because it's a huge part of your ministry, it's a huge part of just your livelihood, to generate posts, to generate things that will bring in more viewers? Because the clickbait is obviously a huge whirlwind within the social media. How do you navigate or walk that fine line?
Yeah, Hayne, I've been cognizant of the fact that I write about a lot. I write about politics and grief, and I write about religion and family and mental health and all sorts of things. And what you realize is that because people are so exhausted and they're so kind of affected by the tribalism that we're immersed in, they're looking for something that makes them feel seen. And so because of that, if I write something that's very confrontational to the church or something that's really critical of a political movement, people will embrace that. And so it's hard to deny that that's part, I want that. I want people to feel seen and heard by the writing, but you also don't want to be generating that in anticipation of that. So do I get up and say, am I still in this posture? Am I trying to put forth anything that's redemptive or offer solutions? And so you have to mix that up. And I try to have a variety of ways to express these things that we're talking about, and not just play to one certain emotion, and that being the outrage or the resentment.
Yeah. In your book, I grabbed pieces of it, and I love this question that you asked. How do we transform this near paralyzing sense of sadness into something redemptive? And maybe kind of adjusting that a bit to how do we transform this near paralyzing sense of chaos that we see on social media, the sadness that we feel, into something redemptive. What would be your answer to that, to the listener that just feels kind of lost at sea and drowning?
I think what I ask people to do is I want people to embrace their anger to some degree as sort of an involuntary prompt that tells us something is not right. And then to say, now that I feel that, I have a decision to make. What am I going to channel that into? What am I going to transform it into? Is it tangible? Is it something that's positive? Is it life affirming? And if I can do that, if I can realize that the anger was a propellant, then that's okay. It's if I only am still in that place of anger and simply posting about it and brooding, then it's going to grow toxic within me, and I'm going to be as miserable as the people that I look at and say, how are they so miserable? So it's almost like it's a challenge to not become exactly what you're concerned about. And I think the way you do that is by saying, okay, I know I feel these things, but I have to transform that into work, whether that's individual work or being part of a collective. And once you feel that agency, then I think that takes away some of the toxicity of your anger.
You had a whole piece in your book about anger. I'm going to read this. I'm just quoting you here. Oh. So I think there's so many things that you wrote that I thought were really, really important. I think that an unappreciated part of Jesus that tends to not get featured in needle points and memes is his anger. His righteousness and redemptive pissed offness, his passionate objections to seeing the powerful preying on the vulnerable, watching the religious hypocrites pollute the system, witnessing the self-fed, living close-fisted towards the hungry. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the harshest words he had were for the religious. Yeah. It was the poor, it was the vulnerable, it was the marginalized. We just saw this incredible piece of love. So, what are ways that I'd love, because I tend to buzz with anger, usually 95% of the time. Yeah. I'm just always trying to dial it down a little bit.
Dr. Banner.
And exactly. Yeah. Well put. My son, who's 14, is very similar to me in that regard. And we just watched, it was Guy Ritchie's version of King Arthur, which had Charlie Hunnam. I don't know if you've seen the film.
I have not.
But it's a beautiful film, but it's just the story of King Arthur and pulling the sword from the stone. But in Guy Ritchie's version, at the beginning, King Arthur, when he realizes who he is, because he is using that, every time he uses the sword for his own selfish gain, for his own anger, it destroys him. But then he learns through community, through friendships, to start using that anger, using that sword as the metaphor for the benefit of other people, and he becomes King Arthur. Right. So I love that metaphor, and that's a metaphor I've been using with my son. It's like, your anger's not bad. It's just what context are you using it in? So, and I love the piece that you're highlighting the anger of Jesus, because it's so true. What are your tips? What are your tricks to harnessing anger for something redemptive versus something destructive?
I think it's looking at, we joke about the term righteous anger. People often say that to me. And I say, well, that's problematic, because everyone who's ever been angry thinks their anger is righteous and their cause is just and their motives are pure. And so I have used the word redemptive anger to say, what are the results of my anger? If I look and rewind a little bit, okay, I found this thing that set off an alarm in me. What did it do in me? And then what did I do as a result? And so is the world any more compassionate than when I got angry? Is it any more just? Is there greater diversity? Are more people feeling seen and heard? And if not, then I have a problem, and that I'm really not doing anything that affects the world because I got angry. And I call it Jesus' ferocity for humanity. And I think whether you're religious or not, that's something we can all tap into, because all movements of human and civil rights progress have come from something that we knew wasn't right. And there was an outrage attached to that. And so then it's about getting into a community where that outrage can be expressed in a way that builds something or that tears down something that needs to be torn down.
Yeah, reading your stuff, you're definitely connecting with a demographic that I definitely have an affinity with, for sure. But I've realized that I've had to be really careful when I'm communicating that for those that don't agree with me, that I'm not making them defend themselves. I'm not making them defend what they believe, what they think, because when I do, their ego or their pride, your hubris will never allow them to think beyond it. Even if they even think I may be wrong, they'll never say it out loud. Yeah. How do you navigate that space? It's hard for me to do that. How do you navigate that space?
Well, I think it's realizing that people have come to their present theological and political conclusions the same way that I have. Over time, a great deal of wrestling and discovery, and whether it's prayer or thought. And so I want to respect someone's road, even if I don't agree with their convictions that they've reached to their conclusions right now. And so the most dangerous thing I often do for someone who's in a faith system that they question is I question it from my perspective, and I invite them to, share the questions with me. And that's often enough to get someone really uncomfortable. And because we're talking about stories that are really that we treasure, our faith story, whatever we grew up in, that was the thing that held everything together. And I always say no one has time for an existential crisis. And when you begin to ask questions of your faith or your politics, there is a turbulence that comes with that. And there is often a grieving of the old story. And then a decision, what am I going to do now in response? And most people don't want to do all of that. So we're having a conversation with them, and they're in their heads trying to make sure they don't have to step into that place where everything could fall apart.
Matt, you got anything?
I've been listening. I've been an audience member, and I've been really enjoying this. Hayne, your question just made me reflect on myself so much. Last night, in fact, you've been talking about anger. My partner just said, you just seem so angry about the world and politics. And I broke down for hours and realized, yeah, I am. I'm pissed off, and I'm mad that not everybody else is as mad as I am. And there's just so much turmoil in the world and in me over the state of the world. So, I'm struggling. I'm struggling with the purpose of the book. Is it worth fighting for? I don't know. I'm struggling to figure that out. So this whole conversation brings up a lot for me.
Yeah, Matt, I remember being I was in Minnesota, and I was speaking at a church, and a woman stopped me in the sanctuary there and I was getting ready to speak, and she said, "Could I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Sure." And of course she starts crying, and that happens a lot to me lately. I try not to take it personally, but she said, "I'm so angry all the time." She said, "I hate how angry I am. That's not who I used to be. And I can't stand how angry I am." And I said, "Well, you may be angry, but you could be something else." I said, "You could just be grieving. Have you ever considered that you're in mourning right now?" And that she began to say, "Well, I never thought about it that way." And she could then process, I've lost friends. I'm grieving, my idea of the church and my place in America. And I think that's a lot of what we and so many others are dealing with. The anger is, some of it's a symptom of the amount of loss that we are reckoning with. And so it's something that I never want to feel badly for that, because that grief means that my heart is like working properly. Right. And so I tell people, if you're angry and you're grieving, celebrate, because that really means that you still, give a damn enough to keep going. And I think so many people are just exhausted from all this that they check out. And because of the work we do, we're always there, and we're fighting with and for something. And that's a hard place to live.
Yeah.
Reading your work, it's in a way very, very political and very politically driven. And I'd love to jump into that in just a little bit. Me personally, I tend to lean more towards democratic socialism, even beyond the current scheme, for lack of a better term, that we have in politics. And I'm going to put some words in Matt's mouth and let him, Matt's more very attracted to communism even. So we're coming from some very different spaces than probably most folks that are interviewing you, at least our own political bent leanings. In terms of that anger, because we have the anger, and I'm more sympathetic to the anger that I'm seeing in probably the camps that you're speaking with and you have an affinity with. Can we talk a little bit about the anger on the other side? Because I think that there's a lot of anger there as well.
Yeah, sure.
And how do you, or what do you think's fueling that anger? There's something that I wanted to also read in your book that I thought it was so good. It reminded me of a book written by Anne Applebaum. I don't know if you're familiar with Anne's work.
I've heard that name.
She released a book in 2020, The Twilight of Democracy, The Seductive Lure of Authoritarianism. And Anne Applebaum, she's interesting. She's an American. She's a Polish American. She has her Polish citizenship now, but she was born and raised in America. But she married the Foreign Minister of Affairs in Poland. He's a former Foreign Minister of Affairs. But I listened to her interview by Ezra Klein. Anne had a very fascinating observation, because she's lived the last 25 years in Eastern Europe, and she's seen the rise and fall of these personalities all the time. You said in your book, it's easy to blame Donald Trump for the collective heart sickness we've seen here in recent years, but he didn't create this cruelty. He simply revealed it and leveraged it to his advantage. Anne Applebaum, in her interview, said, Donald Trump's not interesting. Which was fascinating. She goes, she said, he's a dime a dozen. There are people like that all over Eastern Europe that are looking. What they're looking for is the right demographic to hook into and then bring them to power. They are really uninteresting people. They're two-sided. There's nothing about them. What is it in our culture that you think has created the anger that the other side feels so fervently?
Well, I think the worst of politics and religion leverage fear, phobia, prejudice, and, the evangelical system really runs on the need for an enemy, an encroaching danger, or some terrible adversary. And so I think when you begin to be immersed in that through your churches and your media and your politicians, you're perpetually afraid. And so I always believe that regardless of what our theology or our politics none of us are at our best when we're terrified. And so when you see people that are continually in that state, and then let's add to that the fear of God sending you to hell for not hating the people that he hates. So I think it's people addled by fear. And so, there are things too that they're seeing in the world, and they're trying to make sense of them like we are. We all have a story we tell ourselves. And so I think it's just the worry that we are, that the side is feeling, that we're under siege, and how can we help ourselves? Well, we can't, but this powerful authority figure, they'll help me. Even if they created the fear in me to begin with, they don't think that through, or they aren't able to see that. So I think that's a huge part of it.
Are there things that you would touch on 10, 15 years pre-Trump that really set the stage for that type of visceral collective tribal anger?
Well, I think we had an African-American president, which really, while many people saw that as a sign of progress and took sort of an exhale, others were doubling down, and they were alarmed by it, and they were infuriated by it. And so having been in that world, seeing what the response was in the church, and knowing that because of this, it has stoked this sort of this racism and this misogyny and this nationalism that were really there but concealed due to decorum. And so once they sort of lost the desire to conceal it, and then you have someone like Trump that says, embrace the worst of yourselves, then it became much more fashionable to express those things. And so, the anger is a complex thing because we all imagine ourselves as decent human beings. And so we all believe that we're angry because it's a just cause. And how do you get through to people and find where's the reality in that, and that's one of the biggest challenges right now. It's what is the reality that person is working from within, about the systems, about the politicians who they admire, and all that.
Personally, I'm a very big proponent of the separation of church and state. What if campaigning was illegal in religious institutions? Because I feel like they really capitalize on religious institutions. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
You would think
technically,
it would be.
501c3 isn't supposed to be permitted.
Yeah.
Right. But they've obviously dialed into Christian universities. I mean, even on both sides of the aisle, you know, my father and I were talking about it, who's way more conservative than I am. It's like, you know, the Republican candidates are in these evangelical white spaces. The Democratic candidates are in usually African-American, even Jewish settings. They're connecting with groups that are religiously tribal because they want that tribal vote.
Yeah.
Would the volume be a lot lower if those candidates were not allowed to campaign, A, in those places, and B, how does the church, let's say a pastor who's listening to this, who's trying to navigate, I don't want to get political in the pulpit, but at the same time, reading your work, there's a lot of politics to it. How do you navigate? This is getting a very convoluted question. How do you navigate that separation of church and state?
Well,
it is.
Well, it's a complicated dilemma. I think for me, one of the dynamics is that I think more progressive, liberal people of faith have slowly over time ceded the conversation on spirituality to a conservative religion. And so it's much more natural for conservatives and in the church and politics to naturally align and to see that as not see it as abnormal. And so I think progressive spirituality has been sort of on the periphery. So it hasn't had that overlap. It's much more in political organizations that maybe are left leaning. But I think for churches that are conservative, it's realizing that I, as a pastor, when I started out, I wanted church and state to be separate. Now, I can't separate my personal morality from my personal politics. However, I don't want to legislate that for someone else. And I think that's what the right doesn't understand, is that it's actually antithetical to your own faith story, because the story of Jesus is him offering invitation and people choosing whether they wanted to follow or not. So compulsion was not part of that. And that's what you see when you begin aligning the church and the state, is mandated theology, not just for myself, but for other people. And that's not something I think any genuinely spiritual person wants, their belief system imposed on someone else.
Where are the areas, because you are highly critical of the right, and where are the areas where you see divisiveness in liberal politics? You see divisiveness in the Democratic Party?
Well, I think you see it as just sort of now because of what we've been immersed in for almost a decade now, is this sort of knee-jerk response that says there is no place to meet to even begin to have a conversation on the hows of getting to a solution. It's simply the battle posture and then the screaming from a distance. So I think progressives are as in danger of doing that, and with one another. I think because a progressive politics is by nature welcomes more difference, it's difficult to navigate that difference, where though it's not completely true of the right is more monolithic in that conservative evangelical belief system. And when you get a group of people who might be theists and non-theists, even, how do you find common ground to perpetuate something that you agree on? And so I think the left has a definite problem with internal fractures and an inability to say, what is the greater good we want to accomplish and how can we? So, but we're all completely tribal and reactionary right now because of the systems that we're working in.
Hayne said earlier that, I identify as a communist. I'm as far to the left as you can pretty much get. So I struggle with the Biden thing, like defending Joe Biden, because he seems like a part of the problem to me. He is perpetuating violence in the Middle East. He's continuing the policies of our state that kill people, that destroy lives all around the planet right now. And from our relatively comfortable positions, it's hard for us to realize the impact that our country has on other people.
Right.
So as a leftist, I'm extremely opposed to those things. And I'm trying to, while I agree with a lot of what you say, and a lot of the, there are some morsels in your writing that really hit, and I think are great for a certain audience. I struggle with it because I can't see myself voting for Joe Biden. I can't make myself do it because it feels like I'm choosing an evil when I'd rather not choose the lesser or the greater. And you have a whole piece about that, but I can't get there. I haven't been able to get there. And I want to give you the chance to do it because you talk about that a lot.
Yeah, Matt, I appreciate you saying that. And for me, I realized, probably a decade or so ago that I needed to vote sometimes strategically rather than intellectually or emotionally almost. I needed to make sure that I was trying to avoid something that I thought was going to be more detrimental down the line. And so when I look at just the whole MAGA culture and the kind of people that are now in the Republican Party, I grew up independent and I'm still registered independent. And I see the human and civil rights rollbacks for LGBTQ people and for people of color and for voting rights. That to me is, I need to be in a defense posture and I need to vote in such a way that we prevent that, because people will say, I hate this two-party system, and I agree with them. But I feel as though if Trump is allowed another tenure, we will be down to essentially a one-party system, and our options will be so few. Some people say, well, we blow it up and then we'll kind of rebuild it. But that only works if the Republican Party were to step aside and say, okay, do that. I think we're going to find that they're going to be much more malevolent and much more violent given a second term. And so simply for me, I see all the flaws of the Democratic Party and of Joe Biden. But for me, it's about preventing something that I think is far beyond. If I look at Project 2025, for example, I don't see the Democrats with any kind of plan that's as malevolent as that. And so that's what I'm going to choose with my vote. But I totally understand the conflicts. Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels almost like a triage.
Yeah.
Being in emergency medical services, emergency fire services professionally. It just kind of reminded me a couple of years ago, we went on a horrible car crash where we had 5 victims and we had to triage them. One that we knew was going to die right then, others that we knew needed care immediately, but were going to continue to suffer, and others that were right on the brink. And we had to write off the gentleman that we knew was going to pass as people are screaming at us, take care of this guy. And then we were having to pay attention to a woman that had a snapped femur and possibly bleeding out because she was in that moment the most important thing for us to focus on as far as saving life, even though we're giving up on somebody that they're still alive, but we know the inevitable end for them.
Yeah.
For you, Matt, does that feel, or even John as well, does it feel like a triaging?
That is such a good description. And I think maybe the difference is, for me, the man that's already dying and that we have to give up on is this country and its system, this Western identity and this Western way of doing things. Just feels like we already know it's failed us. It's going to continue to fail us if we continue to prop it up. And frankly, I think we should shoot it like a dog to save ourselves. That.
Sure.
And I feel like anything less than that doesn't feel like enough for me. But I'm also so tied up in my guts about just the way things are all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Matt, and I completely get it. And for me, part of it is my job. I call myself a collector of stories, like a war correspondent.
About myself.
I love that. That's so good, John.
And so I hear that all the time, and I hear stories all the time, and I try to remember those stories. And so if I'm someone who, is losing autonomy over their own bodies, and I see a group of people saying, we're going to continue to make that a priority, then I feel now it's hard, because then you go, well, there's there's whatever, there's the conflict in Gaza, there is racism in this country, there's economic disparities, all these things. And so we're trying to calculate what can we do the most good with our time here. And it does feel rather hopeless. And it does feel like the system is irreparably broken. I think I want to give as many people options as we can. And I think that authoritarian leaning and seeing Trump putting his family in positions of power, it's just, to me, I don't want to inflict violence on more people by being tired of the violence that already exists. So it's fraught with problems, no question.
Yeah. It's a struggle to feel moral right now.
And to feel effective.
Yeah, and to feel effective. I think the answer for me is going to be that I probably have to vote for Cornell, and hope and pray that somebody gets a 3% so that something can, some money can be unlocked for third parties. But that's probably as good as I think it can get as far as options for me. And I think a lot of people who are further left are really struggling to give Joe the vote this year. I think it's incredibly likely that Trump is going to win, and that is concerning to me. But I think we've already shown ourselves our heart when we let him win the first time. So that it's a struggle for me. You seem a lot more hopeful than I am, but I also feel incredibly hopeful that eventually we'll shrug this thing off. That's holding us back as a species.
Yeah. And the other thing, Matt, that for me, speaking for myself as a cisgender heterosexual white guy, I realize that I'm probably going to be okay. And no matter what happens, it's realizing, okay, I always ask people, play the movie forward 10 months from now. So Trump gets in, and even though we're saying, but if that has to happen, it has to happen. I try to imagine what the world will be like for people already under duress. And I don't think anyone's going to have it easier. Everyone, whether they're, Muslims or immigrants or women or people of color, they're going to be further assailed by Trumpism. And so I don't feel like, for me, I've loved Cornel West my whole life, and I respect him deeply, but I question the whys of the timing. And I feel, looking at my 14-year-old daughter and saying, to willingly place Trump in power over her life feels irresponsible, and even with all the baggage. So like you said, we, no answers. I mean, we don't. And the other part about this is we're feeling this because you're an empathetic human being. I am. And so we're trying to figure out, I'm pissed off, I'm grieving, and I don't know how to fix this. And it's the unfigure-outable nature of all this that it's almost impossible to carry.
And we started off talking about the lack of certainty, and I think we can see we're pretty certainly there. Yeah.
Matt, did John just convince you to vote for Sleepy Joe?
No, he didn't. But I do see where you're coming from. I think a lot of that is the reason why those things aren't compelling to me isn't because I don't care about those matters. I'm a queer man, and I have a trans partner, so those are all things I care about greatly, and directly affect my life. But I don't think that the Democratic Party is necessarily on my side either on that. I don't see them going out of their way to ensure that my partner has the same rights as everyone else. I didn't see them, pack the courts, which was the solution to the abortion question. There's just a failure to act that has occurred over the last several years. That makes me think that that party got really, really comfortable with a certainty that they couldn't be beaten by Trump, and boy howdy, did they. And I think instead of waking up to the reality that this party isn't really representative of the people we think we're representing, they kind of doubled down on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I will stop positing my political view.
All right, man.
But I want you to know where I'm at. I'm kind of in this. I feel in a rock and a hard place and squeezed, and also it's a moral question for me, and I'm struggling with it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I remember I felt that way toward the church my whole, last 20 years of my life as a pastor. I'm fighting with and for my faith tradition simultaneously, and feeling exasperated for it, and yet having this desire to fix it. And I think that's what we're feeling. I mean, this is a place we call home. We don't have a lot of options, and it's trying to figure out what is the best possible case scenario to give us the best chance at surviving. And I don't blame, I'm smiling a lot, but my feeling distraught is a daily occurrence too. So it's just about, but I'm looking at the legacy of people for, decades before us, and they were facing all sorts of stuff, and they just said, I'm going to do my best and keep going. And so that's all we can do, and fix it as we can.
I appreciate how transparent you've been about that, because just the following your social media, I was like, this guy just loves Joe Biden so much. He just loves Joe Biden. But you seem not to be fully cult indoctrinated. So
I would hope I'm not. I hope I'm not. And it's really, it's. I see again. I see a defense, a shield, and maybe that's something, we don't agree on that. But for me, that's the instinct, at least. That's the attempt.
Moving into this election season, what's the recipe? What advice would you give to someone to find courage and compassion?
Well, Hayne, I think like we've been talking, I mean, this is almost impossible stuff. So we just have to do our best to bring the best version of ourselves to these conversations, to make as wise a decision as we can, to advocate for the things that we care about, and to realize that November 6th, when we wake up, whatever the political reality is, all of the brokenness, all of the, suffering and injustice is going to still be there. All the homophobia, all the, the nationalism. So it's about not realizing that there are some things that are not going to change on November 6th. And we're going to have to get up that day and do all the same work we're doing now. And realize that half of the country probably is going to be emboldened and half are going to be despondent. And we're going to have to be aware of that. And so whatever our politics and our theology and our moral code calls us to do, we're going to be more necessary than ever. So it's a long haul that we're in. Yeah,
it is. How much hope do you have for the future?
7%. No, no, I'm kidding. What? After talking to Matt knocked me down 10%. No,
way to go, Matt.
Here's what I'd say. I always feel hopeful, and the reason why is because Matt and Hayne, we've talked about anger and grief and all this, and what that's saying is, hey, we really care deeply, and we know something's not right, and so as long as enough people feel that way, that's where the hope is, right? It's in saying, this is broken and needs fixing. And if I recognize its brokenness, that means I realize that humanity is tethered together. And so that's what we work with.
I love that.
Absolutely. It feels like, and I think we even see this in the scriptures in the Old Testament. Gosh, to the credit of the Jewish people, to give their history, we see these progressive steps forward, 2 steps forward, and we see a step backwards.
Yeah.
It's this 2 forward, 1 back, 3 forward, 4 back, 8 forward, 2 back, and almost like a stock over history. You see this up and down, up and down, up and down, but hopefully we're on a trajectory moving up. Do you feel like that we're moving up as not just as Americans, but just as humans?
It's hard to say when you're looking, I have people say all the time, well, historically these things happen and they have, of course. When you're in the dip, when you're living in the dip though, it's like, it doesn't feel like, oh, this is fine. I have perspective. I think, it's a longer conversation, but I think the social media has really changed the way we interact, but also the way we perceive what's happening. So years ago, we didn't have this constant inundation of bad news that it can artificially enlarge the threat that sometimes, or it can bring us so much pain that we can't hold it all. So I think it's hard to assess where humanity is in the grand scheme. I think we're more aware of the suffering now than we ever were. And that may be the problem, but it's not, the solution is not knowing less. It's about figuring out, okay, well, what do we do? Knowing more. So.
Right. Yeah. Right. John, I could keep talking to you for the next hour. This has been fantastic.
I've enjoyed it. And if you ever want to do it again, we'll do it again after the election, and we can say, I told you so, or I told you so. That'd be great.
I should have you. I have a show too called The Great Deconstruction. So you should join. We should do one for that too.
That'd be
We're
that'd
actually
be great.
recording in that now, but I think that would be great. I'd love to have that conversation.
What I just heard John say, Matt, is that you and I are cool. So I think
I knew I
today
was.
I feel cool.
That's right. I mean, who questioned that?
Yeah. John, you are a super cool guy. Talk about where your book is, where people can buy it, the best places to reach you online, to just check out your stuff, your Substack.
Yeah, my last name is Pavlovitz, Pavlovitz. There are not a lot of them out there. So if you find one, it's probably me. And, nice. All the social media platforms, wherever you buy books. I just love to connect on Substack, Instagram, all that stuff.
Perfect. And Pavlovitz, that's Irish? Is that Irish?
Yeah, that's right.